Hello. Here for our first final project, we have recreated a setting and mock interactive first person experience of George Orwell's famous novel, 1984. The map, as you could see, is built featuring many builds that were present in 1984, along with add ons. The point of this interactive experience is to create a mock replica feeling the general characters feel, mainly from the perspective of the proles and the outer party as well, including Winston, who fall under the fate of the party's constant influence, mind control, and stalkative atmosphere. The map was mainly built with the use of symbolism and metaphors throughout the map to really pinpoint the feelings and experience felt throughout 1984. As of course, a real scale replica of the city would be too hard, complicated, but most importantly, simply boring and felt unoriginal. Using the game's assets and our capabilities, we pushed it to our limits and to construct our masterpiece. Keep in mind, there are many boundaries with what we have, but we were still able to produce this spectacular interactive experience. We implemented the key setting, which is an important and significant element of 1984, as the cultural, physical, and geographic influences inflict a significant effect into the well-being and social aspect of the general population. This was particularly implemented in many methods of the party. We included many uses of obscurity, paranoia, and unfathomable behavior and implementations that the party associates with and does. As the party's unusual behavior can correspond to how the general population thrives, mending their perception into varying contradictions, such as doublethink, for example. One huge implementation enforced by the totalitarian regime of the party is the Thought Police. Here is the building that represents the Thought Police, a large military-like structure containing many files and hidden secrets of which contradict its implementation of its enforcement to the public. As the novel 1984 uses a lot of juxtaposition and irony, which best contrasts the totalitarian society. Here is a structure, or headquarters of the Thought Police, which we have concluded to be part of the Ministry of Love. The rich, exquisite armor displays the budgeting, funds, and effort of which the party is spending. As well, there are many hidden rooms, files, and the building itself looks quite well hidden, as shown by the tinted windows and the lack of windows as a whole. This overall expresses the omniscient and general mystery of the Thought Police, as it in a way symbolizes how they are always watching without the victim even knowing it. The Thought Police, after all, is responsible for detecting and, most importantly, suppressing independent and free thinking through the use of various methods. This can be used by mass telescreens which display Big Brother on it, watching and hearing every single move. Here, I gave Big Brother a gray monotone look with an aristocrat/dictator sort of look to give an ominous glance inflicting apprehension on the people. The dictator-like look represents the worship he has received, as he represents almost similar to a Jesus figure, as seen by this huge statue right in the middle of the city. These implementations of him also represent the fear inflicted on the people, as Big Brother, despite mainly being displayed on telescreens and banners in the city to replicate the feeling, we made him an embodiment or a sort of golem summoned by the practices of the party. The ominous and robotic movements represent how Big Brother isn't portrayed as a real person, but more of an entity or a concept which can be constructed as shown by this summoning, which appears similar to cult activities, which can also be mass-produced at an alarming rate, where civilians are constantly exposed and reminded of his existence and authoritarian power over the minds of people as in our game, similar to the thoughts experienced by the civilians of 1984. A strong, all-ruling power and omniscient being, patrolling the streets 24/7. He is praised, as seen by this other statue as well. He can really come into many forms, too, in the story 1984. Big Brother is quite a vague being, and can really be different depending on a varying perception. It could also represent the obscurity of the government, similar to how Winston was manipulated and tortured into thinking 2 plus 2 equals 5. As for an example, Here, this giant pumpkin statue, staring omnisciently at the civilians, can represent the obscurity and pure playfulness and useless entertainment that the party plays on its own civilians. The statue is purposely a bit further away, as something as obscure as 2 plus 2 equals 5 wouldn't really be a threat, but is just there in the back of their minds of the civilians. But in general, it ruins the person's independent thinking and free thinking, and can break the morality and psychological being of a person. Now, moving on to the general city. The rich main background of the city contrasts the class struggle and inequality of the people. Proles live in a much more bland background, which basically represents their repetitive lifestyle here. They are even fenced from each other. This represents the isolation people face, as civilians feel restricted with little to no social interaction due to the oppression by the party. In contradiction, the inner party, despite not being too talked about, we can assume they have a luxurious and exquisite building, rich material, and less privacy. As you can see, they have the ability to remove telescreens of their personal choice. But not too much is known about them, as it isn't really described by the story. However, we can take into account that their motives are really omniscient and obscure, as shown by this beacon. While obviously not being real, it displays the ambiguity and absurdity of the party, along with, as mentioned before, its cult-like actions that just lead to more questions when stumbled upon. The endless protruding light represents the party's absolute power and influence, as beacons can usually be in the heart of a city, in societies and ancient societies as well. Beacons can often represent a symbol of hope, which can metaphorically represent inspiration and guidance during tough scenarios, which adds on to many ironies implemented in 1984, as in a way, its ever-expanding light sheds lies into the clouds in the atmosphere spread throughout the nation. Speaking of ironies implemented, here we have also added the famous buildings of 1984. This includes the Ministry of Truth, as shown by its pyramid-like structure. We took descriptions from 1984 and put it into here, as we can interpret from the description the book provides as well. It's really large and provides information which relies to be fed to the general population. All books and information directly provide respect to the government, with no traces of text going against the party. If they are created, they are ceased and out of existence, along with the perpetrators involved, which will be re-educated, which is the job of the Ministry of Love. At first glance, may seem like an innocent jury system, as seen by the court-like building we created, but in reality, under the building are torture rooms, which are used to re-educate or simply wipe off the existence and any trace of the person, with added help from the Ministry of Truth. As seen by the map, by using X-ray, there are many hidden underground rooms that are unknown to the general public. Its immense size sheds a feeling of an unknowing truth implemented by the government under their world, almost revealing a whole nother civilization. This also replicated the feeling of the below the surface, or quote unquote the true size of the iceberg. Another ministry we added is the Ministry of Plenty, which is responsible for economic affairs and providing goods for people. But, as you can presume, it does not meet the criteria of its name and rather provides barely any goods to its citizens. Here we added the countryside and added the features present with it. It is described as a more peaceful place compared to the main city, but also added the bombardments of war. As you can see here, it is not properly defended as the main city and has much more attacks. People are, however, are still oppressed by the party. The nice sunset and view of nature I added, however, represents the contrasting setting, offering a glimpse into a world outside of the party's control and entitled freedom. As you can see, nature is presented with beauty and boundless limits, which present a huge world of freedom and exploration. Now going back to the city, as you can see, each individual building we made is heavily detailed. On the overall design and builds, a lot of this is constructed for filler and background purposes to better grasp and replicate the sensations felt and the overall vibe of 1984. One common significance that these buildings especially the apartments have in common is the class struggle it can represent. In the lower floors is where poorer and less fortunate live, which can be presumed as the overall majority, while the rest of the occupation of the building, while taking the majority of space, is owned by the small minority of the much more fortunate, such as the inner party, for example. This, in a way, relates to modern capitalist societies. They both relate, in a way, to rigid class systems as a method of power and abuse by the party. It presents the highly stratified society of the party's oppression on the general population. Here we have created Winston's room, located in the Victory Mansions, a rundown system of apartments located in Airstrip 1 described as a grim and oppressive atmosphere. We have also included Mr. Charrington's shop, also known as the Antique Shop, as mentioned in the novel. Mr. Charrington's shop is presented as a connection to the past in a way before everything was entitled into a totalitarian society. Hence its name is an antique shop, as it sells vintage related objects like old clocks and paintings, for example. Mr. Charrington himself is an old person who's least expected to have any ties with the party. Here we are approaching the room above Mr. Charrington's shop. We use the descriptive words and feelings expressed directly into the room Julia and Winston spend their time in. As described by Winston, a crystal cove isolated from the rest of the world. As you can see, there's no windows, as well as mentioning a paperweight like coral, as shown right here, which is the only thing bounding Winston and Julia's memories and individuality. The room represents intimacy, as well as the embodiment of an illusion of safety and privacy, as seen here by the paintings revealing a hidden camera, which in this case we put as Big Brother, as we believe it is more fitting to the general thematic style of our map, and kind of expresses how the civilians feel as well. That basically sums up the main portion of our map, but now to address the elephant in the room. You'll notice that in the city, it's a little off-putting. That's due to this huge mansion that the city sits on. It wasn't that noticeable at first. This was purposely implemented to replicate the dominance of the party, as the mansion below can represent its past before the totalitarian society, as the party tends to literally make past events straight up disappear from history. But we decided to keep it and make it big, as history is an important factor and role in all societies, especially since 1984 isn't too far from when the party took over. Meaning, due to this, we can presume that civilians were most definitely alive and experienced society before the party's rule. Everything influences modern and future actions in many different ways. We feel like this is an important implementation to our map, as a lot of references to the party before the totalitarian rule and just its history in general were presented a lot in the novel. That basically sums up our video game or map for our project. Designing a video game was quite entertaining, as it replicates the feelings and experiences in 1984, and as well allows a person to explore a digital interactive world. But one crucial connection that George Orwell's novel 1984 relates with this game, especially with the party's deeds, is that 1984 in a way relates a lot to video games. In 1984, the Equatorial Front was a wasteland where the three nations have been fighting for decades with no strategic purpose or use as a whole in general. It's been used as simply a giant fighting arena from the economic waste of military budgeting and the buildup of military funding is poured into with no initial purpose, similar to a video game in a way. Same with the party's ideologies and beliefs as a whole controlling its society, similar to video games where morality isn't taken into a consideration, and there can simply be no purpose to each differing outcome, executed by a person's willing desires.